My name is Daniel. I'm 44 years old, and what you're about to hear is not a love story, but the account of how I learned that the person sleeping beside you can become your worst enemy the moment you stop being useful to them. Sighs. While I was lying in a hospital bed, connected to a monitor that counted my heartbeats with a dry, metallic beep, my wife was choosing which dress to wear to go out partying. Bitter. She didn't choose to take care of me. She chose alcohol, the flashing lights of a nightclub, and the touch of strangers while I didn't even know if I would wake up the next day. In that moment, somewhere between the fever and the loneliness of that white hospital room, something inside me died. But it wasn't my body. It was the last drop of mercy I still felt for her. They say that in sickness and in health you swear loyalty, but Rebecca decided my illness was nothing more than an inconvenience to her fun. She thought I was weak, that my silence in that hospital bed meant defeat. What she didn't know was that while the doctors were cleaning my lungs, I was cleaning my life of her presence, preparing the ground for a future where she would no longer have a place to stand. She went out to celebrate my fall without realizing it would be the last night she would ever enjoy under my roof and with my money. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. Rebecca and I had been married for 12 years. To the outside world, we were the couple who had everything. I was a man who built his own consulting firm from the ground up, working 16 hours a day so she would never lack anything. She was a woman who always looked impeccable, devoted to her social media, her yoga classes, and spending the monthly budget on dinners that served more for a photograph than to actually feed us. My mistake was believing the effort was mutual. I thought my role was to provide, and hers was to be my refuge. How wrong I was. Our house was large, silent, and cold. I always felt a little strange in my own living room, surrounded by the minimalist furniture she had chosen and that I had paid for. But that never felt like a home. My routine was predictable, waking up before dawn, checking emails, going to the office, and coming back late, hoping to find a little peace. Rebecca, on the other hand, lived in a completely different time zone. Her mornings started at noon, and her nights ended when the bars closed. At first, I convinced myself that it was just her way of being social, that she needed that spark because I was too serious, too focused on numbers and stability. I told myself that her joy balanced my rigidity. During the last decade, I financed her lifestyle without questioning a single receipt. I bought her the sports car she wanted, the vacations at luxury resorts where she posed for pictures while I answered work calls by the pool, and the jewelry that now, looking back, were simply advance payments for a loyalty she never intended to give. I loved her. Or at least I loved the idea of the family I believed we were building. We never had children, and perhaps that was a hidden blessing because I cannot imagine the damage this woman would have caused in a young mind. The atmosphere in our relationship began to change about a year before the incident. She became more distant, more critical. If I arrived home tired, she complained about my lack of energy. If I wanted to stay home on a Friday night, she called me boring. She started using her phone with an almost addictive urgency, hiding the screen every time I walked by. My intuition was giving me signals, small alarms that I kept silencing with work exhaustion. "You're being paranoid, Daniel," I told myself. "She's just bored because you work too much." I blamed myself for her lack of interest, thinking that if I managed to close that next big contract, we would finally have time to reconnect. Then the collapse came. It wasn't gradual. It was an aggressive pneumonia that quickly turned into a severe infection. One afternoon at the office, the air simply stopped entering my lungs. I remember the suffocating sensation, the cold sweat, and the look of panic on my secretary's face before everything went black. I woke up on a stretcher, surrounded by fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of disinfectant. My first thought was her. I wanted to see her face, to feel her hand, and hear her tell me everything would be okay. When I fully regained consciousness and the doctors stabilized me, I called her. It was 8 in the evening, She answered on the fourth attempt. Her voice didn't sound worried. It sounded irritated, as if my call had interrupted something important. I explained that I was hospitalized, that the doctors were worried about my oxygen levels, and that I needed her to come. There was silence on the other end, silence heavier than any medical diagnosis. "Daniel, it's Samantha's birthday tonight," she said with a coldness that froze my blood. "We already reserved the table. I can't leave my friends hanging because of a cold. Call a nurse if you need something. I'll see you tomorrow." She hung up. I stared at the ceiling of the room, listening to the machines that were keeping me stable. That night, while the fever made me drift in and out of delirium, I received a notification on my phone. Someone had tagged me in an Instagram story. Rebecca appeared smiling, holding a glass of champagne, dancing in an exclusive club. She looked radiant. There was no trace of anguish in her eyes, no concern for the man who had given her everything and who was now struggling to breathe just a few miles away. She was celebrating her freedom while I was trapped in a nightmare. That was the moment of the emotional breaking point. There, alone, with no one to bring me a glass of water or ask how I felt, I understood that my marriage was a transaction where I was the only one paying. She wasn't my partner. She was a parasite enjoying the host as long as he remained healthy and productive. I realized that if I died that night, she would cry at the funeral only to look good in the photos and then rush to the bank to collect my life insurance. My sadness turned into a glacial clarity. The fever went down, but my heart hardened like steel. That night, in the darkness of the emergency room, I stopped being the providing husband and became the architect of her ruin. She wanted a party, and I was going to give her the celebration of her life, but not in the way she expected. I spent 3 days alone in that room. 3 days in which the silence of the hospital became my only confidant. Rebecca didn't show up on the first day, nor the second. When she finally bothered to walk through the door on the third afternoon, she was wearing designer sunglasses to hide the dark circles of an obvious hangover. She didn't bring flowers, she didn't bring clean clothes for me, and she certainly didn't bring any expression of regret. She sat down in the chair at the foot of my bed and let out a sigh of annoyance, the kind people make when they're forced to deal with some boring, bureaucratic errand. "How are you?" she asked without removing her sunglasses. She didn't even touch my hand. I looked at her silently, still feeling the oxygen tube irritating my nose. Her perfume, the expensive scent I had given her for her last birthday, turned my stomach because it mixed with the stale smell of the hospital. I told her the doctors had been worried, that I had almost been moved to intensive care. She simply nodded while staring at her phone. "Well, but you're better now, right? Don't exaggerate, Daniel. Samantha says men always turn a cold into a drama. You couldn't expect me to stay locked up here with you when I already had plans." At that moment, something finally snapped inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the years of dedication or the money she spent in her face. I simply watched her gestures. I watched how she admired her freshly done nails, how she adjusted her hair, and how she checked messages from someone who clearly wasn't me. The humiliation didn't come from her absence at the hospital, but from her soulless presence. She was there physically, but her mind was already at the next party, the next cocktail, anywhere except beside a sick husband. That same night, after she left because she had an appointment at the beauty salon, I made what might have been a mistake, or perhaps the most important decision of my life. I opened our shared accounts on my laptop. What I found was the final blow. While I had been fighting to breathe, she hadn't just spent a fortune on that party. There were also several transfers to an unknown account, small amounts at first, then larger ones, and the worst part, charges from a luxury hotel last month, during a weekend when she supposedly had been on a spiritual retreat with her friends. Betrayal has many faces, but Rebecca's was especially cruel because it was cynical. She felt no guilt. She saw me as an ATM with a pulse, and now that the machine was temporarily out of service because of illness, she was simply making sure to empty it before it shut down completely. The pain in my chest was no longer from the pneumonia. It was the contained rage, a cold fury settling in my stomach like a block of ice. I realized that my house, the one I had built with so much effort, was no longer mine. She had filled it with secrets, lies, and probably other men while I worked late to pay the bills. I remember a nurse coming in to change my IV and noticing the moisture in my eyes. It wasn't sadness, it was the helplessness of realizing my life had become a farce. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Get some rest, sir. You need to be strong when you go home." I looked at her and replied in a broken voice, "I don't have a home to go back to anymore." Because in my mind, the home no longer existed, only a battlefield remained. On the fourth day, the doctors discharged me, even though they wanted me to stay longer. I couldn't. I needed to move. I arrived home in a taxi, weak, my hands trembling slightly from the lingering exhaustion. When I walked in, I found the house in a deplorable state. Empty wine glasses on the living room table, leftover takeout containers, and the smell of cigarette smoke, something I had always forbidden in my house. Rebecca was in the garden, talking on the phone, laughing loudly. When she saw me walk in, she didn't even end the call. She simply waved her hand at me, the way someone greets a distant neighbor. That afternoon I tried to talk to her. I wanted to see if there was any trace left of the woman I had married. "Why didn't you come, Rebecca?" "I was really bad," I said while sitting on the couch, feeling the room spin slightly. She turned around, looked me up and down with contempt, and said the words that sealed her fate. "Daniel, you're a 44-year-old man, not a child. Your weakness bores me. If you wanted a nurse, you should have hired one. I'm here to enjoy life, not to watch you wither away in a hospital bed. If you can't keep up with me, maybe you're the problem." She turned around and locked herself in her room, leaving me there in the dim light of a living room I had paid for, feeling like a stranger in my own house. It was the symbolic expulsion from my own marriage. In her mind, I was already socially dead. She was probably already planning her life after me, with the money she had been quietly diverting. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I slept in the guest room, staring into the darkness, while listening to her peaceful snoring on the other side of the wall, without a single ounce of conscience. My decision was made. She wanted a life of parties and deception, and I was going to give her exactly what she deserved: absolute nothingness. Silent rage is the most dangerous kind because it doesn't make you act on impulse, it makes you act with surgical precision. That morning, as the sunlight filtered through the curtains of the guest room, I didn't feel pain. I felt a clarity I had never experienced before. I got up, poured myself a cup of coffee, and with hands still trembling from physical weakness, but a mind as cold as marble, I called Michael. Michael wasn't just my trusted lawyer. He was the kind of man who understands that laws are tools, and in the right hands, they can become lethal weapons. I asked him to meet me in his private office that same afternoon. I didn't want Rebecca to suspect anything, so I left a note saying I was returning to the office to catch up on lost time. She didn't even respond. She was probably still sleeping off her hangover. In Michael's office, the air smelled like leather and old paper. I told him everything. I didn't leave out a single detail. Her absence at the hospital, the contempt, the suspicious bank transfers, and the luxury hotel. Michael listened in silence, his fingers folded together on top of his desk. When I finished, he looked straight at me and said, "Daniel, you're lucky she thinks you're an idiot. Arrogance is the greatest mistake a traitor can make." He explained that legally we had a long road ahead, but if we played it patiently, we could leave her with absolutely nothing. The first step in my reconstruction was invisibility. During the following weeks, I returned to my usual routine, or at least that's what I let her believe. I played the obedient husband, the provider who questioned nothing. I even apologized for my drama in the hospital. She swallowed it completely. Her ego was so enormous that she accepted my apology as something natural, as if I were truly the one at fault. While she kept spending my money on dinners with her friends and continued diverting funds, I was moving pieces on a shadow chessboard. I hired a private investigator, a man who asked no questions and who became a ghost following Rebecca's every step. In less than 10 days, I received a digital file. It wasn't just a hotel, it was an apartment. She was paying the rent of a place for a guy 10 years younger than me, a supposed personal trainer who didn't have a dollar to his name. The photos were crystal clear, her leaving the building with a smile she had never given me, buying him designer clothes with the additional credit card I had given her. Every image was another nail in the coffin of her financial future. At the same time, I began the process of cleaning my assets. My consulting firm was my life, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with half of what I had built through sweat and exhaustion. Following Michael's advice, we launched a legitimate internal audit that revealed projected losses due to contracts I temporarily decided not to renew or that I transferred to limited liability companies under the names of legal proxies and extremely trusted relatives. My net worth on paper began shrinking dramatically. To the tax authorities and to a future family court judge, I appeared to be entering a severe financial crisis. Rebecca was so distracted by her lover and her social life that she didn't notice the small changes. She didn't notice that I canceled luxury subscriptions she barely used, or that I modified the terms of our shared accounts so that any expense above a certain amount required my manual approval, which I gave through gritted teeth to maintain the illusion that the money was slowly running out. When she asked why the credit card was being declined, I answered in a tired voice, "The market's rough, Rebecca. Being sick cost me valuable management time. We need to tighten our belts." She would get furious, call me useless, but she never suspected that I was the one tightening that belt around her, inch by inch. I also sought guidance from a mentor, an old friend who had survived a devastating divorce years earlier. He taught me the golden rule. Never let them see you bleed until they're already bleeding out. I learned to control my reactions. If she insulted me, I nodded. If she came home late, I didn't ask where she had been. Every act of disrespect from her became another entry in my mental ledger, a reminder of why I was doing this. My health improved, not because of medication, but because of purpose. The weakness she despised so much had become my greatest disguise. I was the hunter pretending to be dead, so the prey would come close enough. The plan was ready. I had proof of the infidelity, records of the money she had diverted, actions that legally constituted marital fraud, and my company was fully shielded. I had built a structure where, in the divorce, she would not only fail to receive substantial support because of her conduct, but would actually be forced to return part of the money she had illegally taken from corporate accounts she believed were her personal wallet. Michael gave me the green light on a rainy afternoon. "Tomorrow is the day, Daniel. Stay calm. Don't fall for her provocations." That night, I had dinner with her for the last time. I watched her across the table as she checked her phone under the tablecloth, probably sending a message to her lover. I felt a deep sense of pity, not for losing her, but for the time I had wasted loving a shadow. But the pity vanished when I remembered the cold hospital bed. Justice was about to knock on her door. The day of the climax had no shouting, no broken plates, no soap opera scenes. There was a sepulchral silence that only the cold steel of reality can produce. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Rebecca was in the kitchen, wearing her silk robe, complaining that the coffee wasn't to her liking. I walked into the room dressed in my best suit, the one I reserve for meetings where I decide the fate of my competitors. I sat across from her and placed a yellow envelope on the marble table. "What's this, Daniel? Problems with the credit cards again?" she asked with that irritated tone that no longer hurt me. It only confirmed that I was doing the right thing. "It's your invitation to reality, Rebecca," I replied with a calmness that seemed to disturb her for the first time in years. "Open it." She did so with disdain, but her face changed color within seconds. First she turned pale, then a violent red climbed up her neck. They were the photos. Her inside her lover's apartment, her handing him the keys to a car I had paid for, her laughing while I was connected to a respirator. But it didn't stop there. Beneath the photos were the audit statements, where every single cent she had diverted was marked with a red circle. "This is harassment, Daniel. "You're crazy," she stammered, trying to recover her posture of superiority. "A judge won't allow you to use this. We have joint assets. I'm entitled to half of everything. Half the house, half the company, half your savings. You can't just throw me out like this." I smiled. It was a short smile, completely devoid of joy. "That's the thing, Rebecca. The company isn't worth what you think anymore. Because of your unauthorized administrative expenses and the legal restructuring you signed last year without reading, the consulting firm is now protected under a trust that you cannot access due to moral conduct and financial fraud clauses. And the house, well, the house belongs to a holding company that just executed an eviction order for non-payment. Your name doesn't appear on any active contract." She jumped to her feet, knocking the chair to the floor. She began screaming, calling me a monster, claiming she had given me the best years of her life. I remained seated, watching her the way one studies an insect under a microscope. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It wasn't her lover. It was Michael, with 2 court officers and a moving crew I had hired. "They have instructions to pack your personal belongings. Only clothes and hygiene items," I said as I stood up. "The jewelry, the designer bags, and the cars purchased with company funds you illegally diverted are now under judicial custody until the lawsuit for damages I just filed is resolved." Seeing the panic in her eyes was a strangely purifying experience. She tried calling him, her trainer, her refuge. But I had already anticipated that move. That same morning, my lawyers had sent a notice to his apartment, the one I had been paying for, informing him that the lease had been terminated and that he also had 2 hours to leave the property. Rebecca listened to her lover's voicemail. He was probably already looking for another victim, because parasites never stay when the host stops feeding them. "You can't do this to me, Daniel. I was with you for 12 years. She screamed as the movers began stuffing her dresses into cheap cardboard boxes. "You were with me while there was health and money, Rebecca. But when my health failed and the money became a strategic resource, you decided to go partying. Now the party is over. You have 30 minutes to leave my property." She tried to slap me, but I grabbed her wrist with a strength I didn't even know I still had after the illness. I looked straight into her eyes, so close I could see real fear forming there. "When I was in that hospital begging for air, you were spending my savings on hotel rooms. Don't talk to me about loyalty." I released her wrist and walked toward the door. As I stepped outside, I heard her crying. But it wasn't the cry of sadness. It was the cry of wounded pride, of a queen who had just lost her paper throne. The officers made sure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. I watched her walk out the front door with 3 poorly closed suitcases, under the gaze of the neighbors she cared so much about. She stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the house that was no longer hers, realizing that the weak man she had abandoned in the hospital was the same man who had just erased her future with a single stroke of a pen. Justice is not always fast, but when it is executed by someone who has nothing left to lose, it is absolute. 6 months have passed since that morning. Sometimes I sit in the garden, the same one where she used to ignore my calls, and take a deep breath. My lungs are healthy now, but my mind is clearer than it has ever been. Michael told me that Rebecca tried to sue me, but when her lawyers saw the mountain of evidence of fraud and the record of her hotel expenses while I was hospitalized, they advised her to withdraw before she ended up facing criminal charges. She now lives in a small rented apartment, working a sales job she despises, trying to maintain a facade of luxury on social media that no one believes anymore. Her trainer disappeared the same day the flow of money stopped. It turned out his love was about as solid as the balance on my credit card. I don't feel joy about her misfortune, but I don't feel remorse either. Life is a system of balances. For years, I placed everything on the scale: effort, loyalty, protection, and money. She only added dead weight and betrayal. The hospital wasn't my downfall. It was my awakening. It taught me that loneliness isn't being alone in a hospital room. Loneliness is being beside someone who makes you feel like your life is worth nothing. Sometimes my friends ask me if I was too harsh. I simply tell them that everyone chooses the ending of their own story. She chose the party when I needed a hand. I chose justice when she expected my inheritance. There are no happy endings in situations like these, only necessary ones. I rebuilt my company. I recovered my health, and most importantly, I recovered my self-respect. She thought she was leaving me to die in that hospital bed, but what she really did was give me the most powerful reason to live, to see how the world finally puts itself back in order when you stop allowing people to walk all over you. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.